Welcome to Glenview TV's Off the Shelf. My name is Yvonne Wolf. I am here with our guest, Naomi Gladish Smith. Welcome to our program.
Thank you for having me.
Well, how long have you been a writer?
Oh, I started writing in my 20s, late 20s, and most people say, well, they have always wanted to be a writer since they were, a kid. Well, I always was interested in writing in school, and I liked writing, but I never thought I would actually write for publication until I got older.
Now, you say you are, from how I read about you, you're famous for writing on the topic of afterlife. Can you tell us about one of these books?
Well, the first book about the afterlife, and it does fascinate me. What happens when we die? Nobody knows, but our religion, I am a Swedenborgian, and Swedenborg, who was an 18th century scientist, philosopher, theologian, wrote a lot about it, and I cribbed a lot of what I read from him. And the first book I wrote, The Arrivals, is about a group of people who leave O'Hare Airport bound for Brussels. And the plane goes down in Lake Huron. And the story follows 9 people who think they have survived. In fact, they have not. They're in a world between heaven and hell, and they're each discovers what kind of person he or she has become because of the choices, the decisions they've made while living on Earth.
Wow, sounds like a supernatural book.
Well, it's supernatural in because it's not about this world, but it's not woo 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 woo. They find that the world in which they find themselves looks a lot like our world, and they don't realize at first that they are not on Earth. So it's very different, but it's not that different, certainly not at first.
So your story, is it more about their emotional reaction to this state of being, or is it reflective?
It's about their journey of discovering themselves, because I think that the decisions we make every day in our everyday lives makes us into this person we're going to be to eternity. And everybody makes bad decisions. Everyone goofs up. But in general, what kind of decisions do you make? Do you try to be useful? Is being kind something that really matters to you? And if it does, then your actions would mirror that. Not always, but if you try. And that's why this isn't a religious book, in that it doesn't, nobody in the book is of my religion. But that's one of the wonderful teachings we have, that anybody of any religion who tries to live according to his or her religion is part of God's church.
I see.
And that is what we should all strive to do, is to live as best we can according to the truths that we've been taught.
So I see it's very inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
I
think so, yeah.
And I guess I'm thinking about your book. If the characters, do they still perceive their exterior as they did
Men are
before?
men and women are women, absolutely. So. And well, I have one person who was very scarred physically,
right, from
an accident, yeah. And she gradually, that scar goes away, and she's a beautiful person. And I think in our next life, our externals, our face, our external self, is going to mirror what we are like inside. Doesn't always happen in this world.
It sounds like a very interesting book. It sounds like a book that makes people reflect on their
I've
own
heard
self.
that.
Instead of just let's say, eye candy, something very exciting, you read it through and then you forget. It sounds like a book you really think about your life and your...
I hope so. I remember one person was a psychiatrist who talked to me about having read this book, and he said, I find myself when because one of my characters is shaving and looks in the mirror and thinks about what he has done and everything. He said, I was shaving the other day and I was thinking, I thought, well, that's a compliment.
Oh,
Yeah.
it certainly
Yeah.
is. And that's what makes good writing connect with
Yeah.
our real lives.
Yeah.
It's like when we actually can see a character in ourselves.
Yeah.
And I see that, I think that's what also sometimes exciting, why people are so excited about movies adapted from a novel, because you see scenes from a movie and say, that's how I imagined it, right?
Yeah.
So this connection with
That's
our
another comment I've had
brain.
several times of either they say, well, you know, that's what I always thought it would be like after death, or they say, I sure hope that's what it's like.
Yes, it's something I think we wonder about, but some of us are very afraid to think about. But maybe your book makes it a less terrifying subject
I
matter
think
to
so.
approach.
I think so. Well, you talk to people who have had near-death experiences, which I have not, and they aren't frightened at all. You know, I've never heard of one that says, "Oh, I'm really afraid of what's going to happen." They all say, "Yes, when it's my time, I'm ready."
And you write about other subjects as well, right? I believe you write essays, and can you tell us a little bit about your essays?
Well, a lot of my essays are just little vignettes about what happened to me as a child, or a person that I know that I respect and admire, and various things that I have published in different venues. The Christian Science Monitor, and various books, collections of short stories and essays. And they're fun too, because you get immediate satisfaction. Books take a long time to finish, and an essay, you have to certainly rewrite that and rewrite, but it's a lot quicker and you get to see it in print.
You say, where have your essays been published?
Well, one was published in JAMA, which is the Journal of the American Medical Association, but it was about the day that my mother died, and it resonated apparently with physicians, because I heard back about it, and I sent it. I didn't know. I would never have thought of sending it to JAMA myself, but my sister is married to a physician, and she said, you ought to try JAMA with this, because I think they'd like it. Well, they did, and then it was published in their little, magazine that they have, and then they republished it in a book that comes out every 10 years of selected essays. So I was really pleased with that.
I'm surprised myself. I didn't think that you can be published other than you have to be a surgeon or some kind of medical doctor as well. But
Well, every week they publish an essay, and most of them are by doctors.
yes. So what is your topic about your mother that
It
was
just
fitting to their
It was just
subject
a
matter?
remembrance of that last day when I visited her, and she was. My father had died 3 months before in the same nursing home, and I sort of gave her permission to die, and we sang together. I sang, and she couldn't really sing, but she could sort of hum. And I came home, and as soon as I got home, I got a call that she had gone. And I figured she waited for me to go. So I wrote about that. Not then, but years after.
Now, you have a wonderful new book. Now, this is related on this subject. You mentioned your father passing before your mother, and you have finished a memoir about your father.
I have. I'm so thrilled because it's going to be published this December. And I have been working on it. Well, let's see. He died in 1990, and so did Mother, within 3 months of each other. But about 89, I told my father that I had rescued his letters. He kept carbons of just about every letter that he wrote as a minister, and those that he received, he kept most of them, at least for a long period. And I told him that I had taken these volumes that were there, and I was going to put them in order. I put them in years that he didn't have them that way. He had them in alphabetical. And I was going to write about it because I wanted his permission. And I said, Dad, this is a treasure. And you say so much about the period of the Second World War and about England and about... I said, it's just a treasure. And he said, one man's treasure is another man's garbage. But I figured that was my permission. I could take that and run with it. And so I have been writing that really ever since. So it's taken me many, many years and many revisions. And he had a very difficult life, very difficult. But because he was the person he was, it's ultimately an inspiring book, I think.
Is
And
this
I loved
book
it.
mostly about him after he became a minister, or his whole life?
His
As
whole
you
life.
started as a child and his
Yes,
hardships.
because he left well, no, not as a child. It starts when he and my mother were married and moved to England. And he left the ministry 12 years afterwards. And why he did that, and the accident that he had in England, and his subsequent really, he always wanted to go back to the ministry of his beloved church. And he did in many ways, but he never had another pastorate. And it's, despite all that, it's called V as in Victor, and he was a victor. That was his name, but it was his perseverance and the story that I think needed to be told.
And the title of your book is?
V as in Victor.
I see.
Unless they change it.
Oh, they could, I suppose. And you can't.
No, they
you don't
wouldn't do
know.
that without my permission.
You never know. So can you tell me about how to start as a writer? Because many of our audience are aspiring writers, and they think about how do I have the time because I'm working or I have a
Yeah.
volunteer
Yeah.
assignment, or how do you get
Well,
started?
I started when I had 4 little children. And so how do you find time to
That
write?
sounds like an impossible situation there.
I sat down at the kitchen table and I bought those big notebooks and I wrote. I wrote in longhand and I wrote. And then when I finished, I typed it all up. And I felt that by the time I'd finished a 300-page manuscript, I deserved to have that published just because I'd worked so hard typing it. And in those days, you couldn't, if you made a mistake, you had to use whiteout or
Yes.
retype the whole blasted thing.
That's right.
And of course, nobody did type that or did publish that, or quite a few after I had written. I was writing mysteries at the time.
I see.
And finally, somebody did publish one of them. But if you really love to write, that's what you do. And you find time. And yeah, it's discouraging to get rejections, and I have a lot of them. But everybody does, just about, except for the young geniuses.
Well, I wonder also, I know myself, I can hardly pick up a story and continue the next day. I write a little here, I write a little there, and I don't see a whole story. Do you actually write a full story, or do you, as a novel, do you continue?
A lot of
or do
people outline, and it really helps them. And I've tried it. It doesn't really work for me for a novel. I know how it's going to end, and I know the characters in it before I even start.
I see.
And I know the situation they're in. And then I'm surprised quite a few times. And if you write every day, I try to leave a little dangle hanging when I stop writing, so I go back and I go over what I've written the day before, because that's you find terrible writing in it. And then I go on from that. And it's amazing how the story sometimes shifts from what you think it's going to be to what it turns out to be.
Did you discover something surprising about your father while you're working on his memoir?
Oh, many things, yes, because when I read those letters, they were amazing, and I'm not gonna say exactly what they are because you have to read the book. But our family was not a family that shared that sort of thing. My parents felt that the children did not need to know the traumas that they were going through.
Oh, yes.
So they protected us, really.
That sounds so similar to my own father.
Really?
Who went through this tumultuous World War II
Oh,
escape
yes.
from China.
Oh, really?
But we knew very little about what he actually endured because he would say, it's not
You don't
pleasant to
talk
talk
about
about it. Right, you don't
Right.
talk about it. Now everybody talks about this. They stubbed their toe. but
You ought to write about it. No, really. That would be fascinating. Do you have any? Did you talk to him about it after?
No,
when
he passed away also, but there's very little that I have to go by. So
Yeah.
when I talked to my mother about it, I said, well, this will have to be fiction. It can never be established as
That's okay.
As a memoir because we don't have enough facts to
I
know
wouldn't
what
if I
happened.
hadn't found all these letters. Really, they were immeasurably helpful, and it was very difficult to read some of them because they went through some very difficult times. And yet I felt it certainly made me understand them, and my siblings. I have 4 sisters and 1 brother, and I sent them little bits at a time. And they did not necessarily remember things the way I remember them, but they all were very, very interested in it, and it helped them, I think, understand.
And perhaps strengthen their bond
Yeah.
with this family.
Yeah.
Now that you have spent 20 years working, over 20 years, I suppose, on your father's memoir, are you thinking about writing one for your mother?
No. For one thing, I don't have any of the material that I do for my father.
Yes.
And Mother was more of an ephemeral person, and she was a wonderful support to her children. She was a great mother, but I don't have the, I don't feel I'm writing a. She comes into the memoir a lot, of course,
Right.
but I did feel a call to write this story. And it's just like I felt it was, the more I got into writing my novels about the afterlife, the more I was just fascinated with it. And I thought, I've got to tell this. Let's find out what happens to these 2 characters. And I wrote another book, and those 2 characters came into it. But after 3 novels about the afterlife, I thought, I've done that. And people ask me, I've been asked many times, when's your next book going to come out? I'd like to, And actually, one of my editors wanted me to write a book about heaven. And I said, I don't think so. I said, maybe it's me, but it's really difficult to write about good people. Well, you need conflict, and you need, it's so much more interesting if you have some really rotten characters in there.
Well, they say that actors say heroes are boring to play.
Uh-huh. I can understand
Yeah,
that.
there are many actors who prefer to play villain because they can be dynamic. They can change their mind. They can be unpredictable and whimsical. All those things that we don't want our heroes to be. We want them to be true and stable. Let's see. So, what is your next topic? Do you
Right now, I think I'm going to go back to short stories. I had one short story that was in a literary magazine that was set in Taiwan. And I was very, I thought that turned out well, and I liked that. It was about Americans in Taiwan. And right now I'm doing one about, well, I'm working on it, so I don't want it. It's set in Japan, but I'm not going to talk about it because I find if you talk about things that you're working on,
Ruins
not
your,
good.
yeah, your
Not good.
creativity.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned Americans in Taiwan, and this reminds me of something too, because depending on the time period you're looking at, my father was an interpreter, and at the time of Radio America, he was the simultaneous interpreter
Was he?
on the radio to tell the story in Chinese. So I think it was very interesting.
Your
that
Mandarin
we
must
have-
be very good.
I have a
Really?
good teacher.
Yeah.
Let's say that.
Wow.
Well, thank you, Naomi, for being on the program with us. And thank you for watching Off the Shelf. This is Glenview TV production, and we hope you join us again.